Are you a leader that is overwhelmed with taking risk? Do you have an overwhelming fear that immobilizes you from trying? Failing forward and failing fast. What about decision making? Are you really slow circling the wagon? Does it feel like Day to your team? Same conversation, no decision. If that's the case, perhaps you are a leader that struggles with risk and a risk mindset. Today, Tammy Alvarez is with us, the founder of the Career Winner Circle, and we're going to have a deep dive into this conversation. My name is Tiffany Odutoye. I go by Tiffany O, and I'm a master coach with the Career Winner Circle. We're excited to talk about this power move related to risk. Tammy, what are some of the implications for leaders related to risk?
Yeah, so let's talk about risk as one of the 5 power moves for the Own Your Power program. This is an area where if you get this right, when you get this right, the downstream impacts of this in terms of the results you create for the business, the inspiration you're able to provide for your team, like what you talked about before, Tiffany, in terms of Groundhog Day, how many times we have to have the same meeting to talk about the same things to make no decision. And, these things will have you show up as a leader in a way that you can be proud of. It will have people coming to you for guidance and wisdom during moments of uncertainty when everyone else is hiding under their desks. And you'll be the one they come to when it's time to make the tough call and to get that big promotion. So getting this right and being able to get comfortable with risk is much easier than we think. And we do that by taking 3 specific steps. The first one is, so let's get really clear on our fear. The second one is, let's create a process that you can use time and time again to get comfortable with knowing what's around the corner and being able to manage for those unexpected outcomes. And then the third one is changing your mindset to an experimental mindset. And I'm going to go into all 3 of these, and Tiffany and I both have war stories we cannot wait to share with you how this has all worked, because Tiffany and I are both transformation experts back in our corporate days, and there was nothing but risk. And so when we think about fear, because none of us want to admit we're actually afraid, but we are, because when you're not taking an action towards something you know is right and good and important, that's a fear-based response. So we have to unpack that a little bit. But what I encourage you to try to think about is, are there monsters or are there dust bunnies under your bed? For me, I know sometimes when I let something fester too long without making a decision, I have created this epic monologue in my head. And it is doomsday scenario and everything is going to fall apart. And it's just like your best CGI action film with everything blowing up in my head. And then when I actually finally break down and do whatever it is I'm not doing that I should be, and I look, I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, seriously, this is what delayed me. This is what I've slowed down, my progress and my team's progress for. So a great way to think about how to deal with fear is to play that doomsday scenario in your head. Get back into that CGI where everything is blowing up and write all those down. And then start to realize and come to terms with, what are the likelihoods that that's actually going to happen in terms of the worst case scenario? And then, what am I going to do? We'll get into the process in just a minute. But knowing what that fear is, and strangely enough, Tiffany, lately, the biggest fear that's been showing up for some of my clients has been fear of success. So it's not always the bad things that happen. Sometimes it's the good things when you take time and think about it. So get comfortable with fear. Understand what your worst case scenario is going to be. And if that's something that you're like, okay, it would really suck, but I could do it, then move forward. And then from there, we're going to talk about process. So Tiffany, how do you get over fear? Because you're a transformation expert. You've slayed the dragons in your life as well. So how do you do that?
There is nothing like a whiteboard or pen and paper or a risk register. Somehow getting it out of your head onto paper, bringing those stakeholders to the table, having the conversations to validate whether or not this is real, perceived, is it something in the marketplace that could really happen, and having a mitigation strategy helps me to get okay with taking the risk. So I have my plan A, my plan B, my plan C, and then we have a mitigation strategy for either one of those. When I do that, and I apply a scientific methodology. I run those PDSA cycles. You're going to talk about process. When I do that consistently, I get really, really clear and I'm okay with taking risks no matter how big it is, especially if I can visualize what the payoff would be.
Mhm. Well, and I found too, with this fear element in terms of taking risk, for me, that was more personal. Like it
Mm,
was the things I was afraid of personally. Like, is my
mm.
reputation going to get damaged? Is my team going to take a hit? Will this initiative start to lose favor with the board? And, when you start to get, because I knew before we do something scary that I'm not the only one afraid. No one's going to sit there and say that, but the entire team is like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this. There's so many things that could go bump in the night. So for me to really get comfortable with my personal risk, my personal fear, which was not just about me, but about my world, then that gave me the courage and the confidence to be able to move forward and actually get my team comfortable with that too. So we share a lot of that kind of stuff during the Own Your Power program. But go ahead, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say there was a question. We ran a program. Dr. Marilee Adams out of the American University partnered with us on a program. And one of the things that she helped us with was this question that really helped all of us get comfortable. And it was, what would it look like if? When we baked that question, change your questions, you change your outcome.
Yeah.
When we baked that question, when I started baking that question into my life, that changed everything. What would it look like if, right? It sort of like gave me a couple of potential outcomes. And it's like, oh, if it was like this, then I would be comfortable. If it was like that, I would be comfortable. If it was like that, or what could I do so that it could be like A, B, C, or D? It gives you a framework for reshaping the narrative around fear, especially related to risks.
Love it. Yeah. So love that question. So write that down if you haven't, hit rewind if you haven't, but make sure you get that question in because it is a game changer. The next thing we want to talk about in terms of being able to make the right risks at the right time is process. Because
Mm.
if you've got a repeatable process, then you know that you've got something that works. You can tweak it as you go, but you've got that confidence because it's not a question of will something go wrong. The question is, what is going to go wrong? When? And how bad is it going to be? Because nothing ever goes as planned. And even if you sat here in your bubble today and made a perfect decision, not that there's such a thing, then through no fault of your own, 3 months from now, with all of the rapid dynamics in our changing environment, that great perfect decision could be the worst idea ever because we're all getting hit with things that we don't see coming and new technology and new ideas and new wars and new elections and all these things that are going to impact things well beyond our sphere of influence. So we need to be prepared. And when you've got a strong process, whether it's a fishbone diagram, whether it's an FMEA, if you're going to be a Six Sigma geek, whether it's just a basic spreadsheet saying, okay, what are all the things that could go bump in the night? What are the chances of it happening? And what is the severity of it actually happening? Then that just gives you that chance to put things in a bubble and say, okay, I got this. We know. And then having those plans after that. So what is going to happen if this happens? What happens when do you pull the trigger? When should you worry? And when you do that before you start, and everyone is aware that this is an eventuality, then the thing that most people are afraid of, which is losing face. So it's like, oh, you're failing. Like something happened, like, oh, I knew this wasn't going to work. You're failing. Then you're like, no, I'm not, because we knew this was going to happen. And here's our plan. Like you said before, Tiffany's plan A, plan B, and plan C. And so having that process that you can trust and using it repeatedly in a transparent way, both for your team and for your allies and adversaries, depending on what you're working on, really gets that leveling playing field. So that way, when things go bump in the night, it's not a catastrophe. Nobody's running around with a hair on fire. It's like, yep, we got a playbook for that. We're good. And Tiffany, you've got some amazing experience with this with your transformation days. So share a story on how this actually applies in day-to-day world.
Not all risks are created equal.
True story.
Not all risks are created equal. It's important, I think, to be very strategic about this, weigh the rewards. You have to be able to take your risk and stratify them. We created a model to help us to validate certain kinds of risk and our responses to them. And of course, as you start to do that, the team weighs in and participates with you on giving the weight to certain risks, right? And when you're able to do that together, you can decide, you know what, this is a big one, and this is why. This is the impact, and this is why, and here's how we're going to make that decision. And right now in leading transformation, they're teaching potential practitioners all of the risk, the science behind risk stratification and risk strategy, and being able to create those models. And so for us, our team, we had a model for being able to do that. And then we could quantify and make decisions about which transformation projects we were going to move forward based on the impact of the score assigned to particular areas of risk. So being really clear and getting good and training your team around creating these models around risk helps with strategic decision making. And every leader needs to be able to do that.
That's
And of
right.
course, if you're going to be making any recommendations about transformation or how that transformation should happen and when, you want to be able to have a model that you can stand behind, one that is consistently applied throughout the organization when it comes to decision making.
Absolutely. And one of the things I would always do privately with my team after we do all the formal risk assessment process and planning is we would have a separate chart on political risk.
Mm-hmm.
So, how much is this going to help or hurt the organization, the team, each of us individually from a political perspective, right? So, and with who? Because sometimes that you are a persona non grata, with the people that are doing the work that's being transformed, yet you are now the board of directors' favorite people. So is that worth it? And starting to play with some of those things. So let's not pretend that we don't care about these things, because we do. But let's just do that on the side, but make sure we're keeping, an eye on that as well.
Tammy, you said something earlier I don't want to forget, and I don't want our audience to forget as we're moving forward. And that is, as you are leading transformation and you're leading the risks for your team, we have to create a safe environment for them to take risk. We have to foster this culture where taking calculated risk is encouraged and supported, even if they don't work out well. So as a leader, we're going to model this behavior, and we're creating this culture so that our team is not so averse to risk, right? And that
Yes,
moves into that
absolutely.
mindset.
Ooh, and that can be scary, which is why we deal with fear first, right? Before we do that. All right. So number 3, to bring home, how do you start to really make the right risk at the right time, is becoming very comfortable with the experimental mindset. Too often we back ourselves into a situation where it's pass fail, success, failure, right, wrong, white, black, good, bad, whatever. And nothing in life is ever that simple. Everything that we do has some things that worked out, some things that didn't, and some things in the middle that were just kind of okay. And when we start to give ourselves the grace as leaders to openly adopt an experimental mindset, then that opens up opportunities to fail forward, fail fast, and to be able to be more successful. And we see this all the time. And I'm sure everybody watching has experienced this, where there's a leader who says, we're going to take that hill. And everybody puts on their armor and they start taking the hill. And then you realize the hill is riddled with landmines. It's like, this is a terrible idea. The hill seemed like a good idea from 10 miles away, but now that we're closer, this is a terrible idea. But we still keep going anyway, because that leader has says, this is the way forward, no exceptions. And they've therefore backed themselves into a pass-fail situation. When you say, that hill looks like it's worth taking, haven't been there in a while, so let's get there and see and reevaluate. And maybe this side of the hill is riddled with landmines, but let's go around the other side and see if we can find a clean way in. And you set that expectation clearly, then taking that hill is not a failure. Taking the steps to take the hill, assessing, changing, and moving forward is absolutely a win. And when we can do that, saying, I don't have all the answers, the landscape is changing, we agree this is the direction, we're going to experiment. What does this button do? Right? Keep the things that worked, get rid of the things that didn't, try again. And when everyone is expecting this, now all of a sudden, that hill full of landmines doesn't seem like a surprise or a failure. And you're not taking people out, right? That are actually taking the hill because they have no choice. And so I think that's really interesting. And what I find interesting is in software development, we have adapted to an agile methodology almost universally now. Right? Everybody knows about scrums and sprints and agile and all these things. We know about this, but we have not adopted this as a leadership principle, and we need to. And so, Tiffany, where has having this kind of mindset been a benefit for you during some difficult times when you've had to take some risks?
When there's the greater the level of uncertainty, for me, that's when you really need to either have a hybrid approach or an agile approach, right?
Mhm.
Developing an MVP. So
Yes.
part of when you start phasing out and you start doing your one-page journey map of whatever this transformation is going to look like, P1 is an MVP, right? We are committing to do this in a short cycle. We're going to move quickly, swiftly, and we're going to do requirements gathering as we gain greater clarity throughout the landscape, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Once that's P1. And so being able to chunk things like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a
One bite
time.
at a time. That's right.
And so when there's uncertainty, we bake in P1 as the MVP. We're phasing this out. We're going to have, a working product a little bit later, but we're going to do a lot of that requirements gathering through that MVP, or trying to create a minimally viable product
Mhm.
on the front end. And that's baked in as a part of the process. And as a result of that, and the team's moving in short waves to try to bring that to fruition. If it's not perfect, nobody ever expected it to be.
You're working too hard, right? If it's perfect, then you've done the wrong thing,
And if
because
we
now
want to
you've
reduce,
created a perfect imperfect solution.
love it. And really the goal sometimes is to reduce the work in progress or
Yeah.
process. So, hey, if that MVP sucks, then we know we're going to can this thing before we invest a whole lot of money.
Ah,
Uh,
that is an excellent point, right?
yeah.
Having your bailout plan before you start. So knowing that, okay, if all these risks happen and this and this and this happen, then we are absolutely not doing this, right? And that way no one loses face. You're actually a smart business person by being able to do that. And so
Mhm.
by using these three strategies, right? Getting comfortable with your personal fear so you can lead forward, understanding and creating a process to be able to manage risk, identify and manage, and then adopting that experimental mindset really helps women step up big, play bigger, and make a bigger impact. So Tiffany, when we get this right, what does it look like?
Oh my goodness. We drive innovation. We overcome stagnation. We build resilience, inspire others, and we help our companies have a competitive advantage.
Sounds like a good deal to me. So what's next?
Listen, Tammy, this has been an amazing journey. We've been on strategy number 4, or power move number 4. We've covered 3 in the past 3 sessions. If you're on this call today and you dug into the risk conversation, why not recap the other 3 power moves that you missed before us? The next one's going to go live and we'll talk about our last power move. But in the next October 1st, we're going to go live with our program to help give you some tools and take this real world, right? In the Own Your Power program. Tammy, how do we break down that program? What does it look like? What do we want them to do next after this session?
Right. So Own Your Power is an absolute game changer for women who want to make an impact. And so by joining our 8-week masterclass that starts on October 1st, you are going to be connected with an amazing group of peers that want to move further, move faster, and have fun doing it as you're building these power moves. So what you need to do is click the link below. You're going to learn more about the program, what's in it, how you get on the, how you get into the early wait list, because we got lots of goodies for people who take action, because we like to reward action takers. And then if you want to have a discovery call with Tiffany to know what this is all about, is this right for you? Is this right for your team or your organization? Both of these links are going to be in this post. So the most important thing you can do is mitigate your risk by joining